Software Update Services. Microsoft Software Update Services, or SaaS as it's better known, enables administrators to quickly and reliably deploy the latest critical updates and security updates to Windows 2000 and 2003 servers, as well as to computers running Windows 2000 Professional or Windows XP Professional. SaaS is just like Windows Update, except instead of every single Windows server or Windows client computer connecting to Microsoft's Windows Update servers directly and updating their software individually, the SaaS server becomes your effective Windows Update server. The SaaS server connects to Microsoft's Windows Update servers and downloads the updates that you require for your computers. Then, your other network computers can simply use the SaaS server to get their updates locally. Now, whether you're in a small or large organization, the obvious saving on internet bandwidth here is tremendous. Of course, the speed of delivering these updates is also increased, and the updates can be screened first, so only approved updates can be installed on your client computers. Now, SaaS is a separate product to Windows 2003. It must be downloaded from Microsoft, and it requires Internet Information Services, or IIS, to be installed as a prerequisite. It also requires the system partition of the SaaS server to be formatted as NTFS, and the location where you're installing SaaS, if it is not going to be installed on the system partition, must also be NTFS. To download SaaS, simply point your browser at www.microsoft.com/windows-server-system/SaaS/default.mspx, and we'll scroll down and you can click the link here to get the file. Now, we've already downloaded the SaaS installation file, so we'll simply double click on the SaaS exe, which will uncompress the MSI file to start the SaaS installation wizard. So we'll click Next, and then we'll agree with the terms in the license agreement, and we'll click Next. Now we've got two choices. We have a typical and a custom installation. Now, I'll choose custom because I like to have some say in what I'm installing. First, we need to tell the installation wizard where we want the SaaS program files stored. The default location is C/SaaS, but you can change that if you wish. Now, here we're also asked to provide a location for the updates that our SaaS server will download from Microsoft. The default is C/SaaS content. Again, you can change that. We'll leave it as it is, and we'll choose Next. Now, a point to make here is the updates can be rather large, in hundreds of megabytes, and well over a gigabyte if you're also downloading updates for multiple languages as well. So make sure that you do have enough space to accommodate future growth. So here we're prompted to choose the languages we'd like to include in our updates. Now, we'll just select English and we'll choose Next. We can change this later if we wish, and we will show you how to do that shortly. Now, here we have to tell the wizard whether new updates for approved items will be approved manually or automatically. Now, what this means is if you've previously approved, say for example, an update for .NET Framework Service Pack 1.1 to allow this software to be installed, and then a newer version, say Service Pack 1.2 is released, to either automatically approve the new version and allow it to be installed, or wait for an administrator to explicitly approve it manually. Now, this doesn't mean that anything that is released that is totally new will be approved. New software patches never before released must still be approved manually, even if we set this to automatic. But for our purposes, we will set this to automatic, and we'll choose Next. Now we need to specify a download URL for the updates. Now, by default, this is the name of your server as evidenced by our URL here, defaulting to Server 02. Again, you can change this later if you wish, but you must accept the default here, so we'll just click Install, and the SaaS software will start copying to our server. Now, this takes a little while, so I will pause the video here, and we'll return when the installation is complete. Okay, SaaS has been installed. Now, we can see that in order to configure our SaaS server, we will need to connect to the name of our server /SaaS admin. So on our server, we need to connect to http server02/SaaS admin. Okay, so we'll click Finish to end the installation wizard, and the web configuration page will automatically load. Okay, here we can see we have a welcome message and some hyperlinks to some online Microsoft documentation about SaaS, and over here we have a few options. The synchronized server link is where we set the synchronization schedule. This schedule defines when our SaaS server will connect to the Microsoft Windows Update site to check for and download updates. Now, currently we do not have a schedule, so we can set one now by clicking the synchronization schedule button. Okay, here we can see that we don't currently have a schedule, so we can set one now. So click on Synchronize using this schedule. Now we'll set our schedule to synchronize our SAS server with Microsoft at the default time of 3 AM every morning. So in the default drop-down box, we'll choose 3 AM. We'll leave it at that. Now this is in 24-hour time, so just be aware of this. And we'll leave it at the default, which is every single day at 3 AM. Now at the bottom here, we can set the number of times to retry synchronizing our server if it fails. Now currently it's set to 3. So if your server fails to synchronize after 3 attempts, then it will fall back to the next synchronization schedule, which would be 3 AM the next day in our case, before trying again. So we'll click OK, and we can see that the schedule we've just set is now recorded up here in green. Now we can synchronize our server by clicking this button. Now as this is a new server and we haven't downloaded any content, this will take a while and it will download a lot of data. So you should first ensure that your internet connection is working and you can connect to the Microsoft site. So before we synchronize our server, we'll go over here to the Set Options link and check here our proxy configurations. Now I wanted to point this out before we attempt to synchronize our server, because you may find that your synchronization fails because of an error in these settings. So if you are going to be using a proxy server, be sure to set these options first. Okay, so now we'll go back to synchronize our server, and we'll synchronize now by clicking this button, and this will begin the process of downloading the catalog of updates and then the actual updates from Microsoft. Now this will take a while, so what I'm going to do is switch over to a server that we had prepared earlier. Okay, so on our new server we'll click on Approve Updates. Now in the right hand pane we can see all of the updates that we've already approved here, as indicated with blue. If you recall, we set our previously approved updates option to automatic when we installed SAS, and we can see here that in red we have an updated link. This here just simply shows that any approved update that has had a version increase or a new update, this one here has been automatically updated by the SAS system. Now for any update for your clients to occur, an update must first be approved. To approve an update, simply check the box here on the left hand side for a new update that we have here and click the Approve button down below. We'll receive a message saying, yes, do we want to do this? Well, we do, so we'll click yes. We'll look at here at the agreement, click Accept, and now we can see the update has been approved. This update will now be available to be downloaded by our clients. Now we'll quickly move on and take a look at a few of the other options here before we go on to something else. We'll click on our Monitor server. Now this link displays what updates we have available. Now these updates are not necessarily the updates that you have downloaded to your SAS server. This is all of the updates available from Microsoft for the SAS supported operating systems and applications. You can click on each of these links here, which opens a text file in Internet Explorer to view them. Of course up here you can see the link to where this file is actually stored, so of course you can go and open this with Notepad if you wish. So we'll close that there. Now when you connect to the Monitor Your Server link here, SAS refreshes the metadata cache every time an administrator performs synchronization. Now the Monitor Server page indicates the last date and time over here that the metadata cache was updated. Now if you do connect to this page and you don't see any information here, you can hit refresh to reload the cache memory. Next we have the synchronization log. Now this shows the history of our SAS server updates from the Microsoft Windows Update website. Now here you can see automatic synchronization that has occurred, the date, the time, and when it occurred. Now if we'd manually set synchronization, we would see manual synchronization written up here. Now we can see here highlighted in green that our software update services is up to date and there was no downloads because we had current information. Now a bit further down we'll just find one. Here we go. Just make that so we can see it. We can see updates that have been downloaded and the status here of successful. Now if for any reason an update did fail to download, we would see the status of failed here. Now let's just scroll down to the bottom here and we can see quite a lot of these all the way down here. Now this was our first synchronization with the Microsoft website, so we downloaded a lot of patches, as you can see. Now at the bottom here we can clear this log or print it if we wish. You can also access this file directly using a text editor. The file name is history-sync.xml and it is stored in the location of your website /auto update /administration directory. So in our case it would be stored at file server /auto update /administration. Now let's go and take a look at the approval log. Now the approval log shows which updates have been approved, when they were approved, and who approved the updates. Now at the top here we can see the most recent approvals. Now the latest approval was the one we just clicked on approve just a moment ago. We can see the date, we can see that it was successful, we can see that the administrator was the account that approved this update. If we do scroll down a little bit here, we'll just find one. Maybe it will be the next one here. Maybe a bit too far. Okay, here we can see one where it was approved automatically by the system process via a scheduled synchronization. So that's the main difference between the two that you'll see here in the approval log. Now, by the way, the Windows event log will show events for each synchronization that does occur. Now it also shows events for failures relating to the synchronization service and whenever the approved list of updates on the server changes. So to prove that, let's go to Start, Administrative Tools, our Event Viewer, and we'll take a look here at the system log. We see a Windows Update Sync Service event. We'll double click on that one and we can see here that the list of software update services updates has been changed. Now that just reflects the change that we just made a moment ago. So we'll just cancel back out of this here. Now by the way, as with the synchronization log, with the approval log we can also clear the log and print it as well. Now this log file is stored in the same directory as the synchronization log, except this file is called history-approve.xml, and in case you forgot, it is located in the server name /auto update /administration directory. So in our case it would be under file server /auto update /administration. Now before we move on and discuss the client configuration and group policy settings relating to software update services, I want to take a moment to have a look at child-parent SUS servers. Up until this point, we've only talked about one single SUS server that downloads content from Microsoft. Now let's consider a situation where we have a head office in London and smaller offices in Paris and Munich. To use SUS effectively in this situation, we need to consider a few things. Firstly, as our head office is in London, we might want to approve updates at London. Secondly, we have 3 different languages to contend with: English, French and German. Finally, we have to think about how we're going to configure our Active Directory, group policy and backups to contend with the SUS server. Now we aren't going to turn this into a full-blown discussion of Active Directory and so on. We're only concerned here with how to configure SUS in this video. So the first thing we're going to need is a parent SUS server. As London is our head office, we will need to install our first server in London, following the same steps we have been discussing up until this point. Now the only real difference in what we've done so far and what we'd need to do for the London server is to be found in the Set Options hyperlink. Now if we scroll down to the bottom here, we will need to add the French and the German languages so that we can download the required French and German updates. Now finally, we'll need to click Apply to approve these updates, and then we'll need to actually approve the updates themselves individually once they've been downloaded to our London SUS server. In France and Germany, we will need to install SUS exactly as we've done before. But for each SUS server, we'll need to set 2 things differently to the London server before we perform a synchronization. The first thing we would need to do is point these child servers to a London server before we start a synchronization, and we would do this up here. The second thing we would need to do is select the French locale for the Paris server and the German locale for the Munich server. Now as obvious as this might sound, remember back on the London server we chose 3 locales, which was English, French and German. Now this is why we need them. As our parent server, London can only provide the SUS updates that it has downloaded. So London needs to download all 3 languages here. Now if we didn't configure London to download the French and German language versions of updates, then these servers here would start requesting software from London that it doesn't actually have when they attempt to synchronize with London. Now the next thing we need to do differently for the child SUS servers is to set the synchronization server to be the London parent server instead of the Microsoft Windows Update server. So under set options for our French server, what we'll do here is we'll click synchronize from a local software update server, and here we type in the path to our London server. For the German server, we would do exactly the same thing. Now one final thing I want to mention about parent-child SUS servers is each of them need to have the store update location set to a local folder, as it is here by default. Now this setting was defined when we first installed our SUS server, but it is worthy of mention here. Now the other option here, by the way, is to maintain the updates on a Microsoft Windows Update server. This basically is just saying we're going to leave the SUS content back at Microsoft's website. Now the only real advantage to my knowledge of using this setting is that a local administrator can still approve updates, but all updates still come from the Microsoft website. So if you do have bandwidth to burn and absolutely no hardware at all to install SUS on, you can consider this an option, even though it's probably an unlikely one. Okay, so that's basically it for setting up parent and child SUS servers. It's pretty simple but very effective. But all we've really done so far is schedule downloads of the Windows software updates. At this point, our clients still don't know anything about it. So what we need to do is configure the clients to use our SUS server, and for this, we'll use group policy. Now we have two choices here. We can define our policy at the site level or at the OU level. But on our test lab, we actually don't have any sites defined, so we'll define our policy at the OU level. So to do this, we'll open Active Directory Users and Computers. So we'll go to Administrative Tools, click on Active Directory, Users and Computers. Now as we're just dealing with a lab with just one computer in it, which is our domain controller, we don't actually have any clients. So what we'll do is we'll just configure this task on our domain controller. In your environment, you'd probably have all of your clients already sitting in OUs here, defined by function, department or location or something like that, so you'd use those. But for us, we'll just right click on our domain controllers and we'll select Properties. Then we need to select the Group Policy tab. Now the first thing we need to do here is to create a new policy for our Windows updates. We can modify the existing default domain controllers policy if we wish, but I prefer to create a new one, so we'll click New, and we'll give it a meaningful name so we know what this actually is referring to later on. We'll just call this one Windows Updates, and then we'll click on Edit. So this brings up the Group Policy Object Editor. Now the policies that we want to configure are located under the Computer Configuration, Administrative Templates, Windows Components, and here we see Windows Update. Now we'll right click on the first policy we have and we'll select Properties. Now the first thing we need to do here in this policy, Configure Automatic Updates, is to enable it. So we'll click the Enable button. Now we need to select from the drop down box and choose one of the three available options. Now the first option here is to notify for download and notify for install. Now when Windows finds updates on the SUS server that apply to this computer, an icon will appear in the status area near the clock down here, telling you that updates are ready to be downloaded. Now if you click the icon or the balloon message, it will display a dialog box that gives you the option to select the specific updates to be downloaded. The selected updates are then downloaded in the background. Now when these updates have downloaded to your computer, the icon then appears in the status area again, informing you that the updates are ready to be installed. If you click the icon or the balloon message, it will provide you with the option to select which updates to install. Now the second option here, Auto Download and Notify for Install. Now this setting, which is the default setting, this tells Windows to download these updates in the background. The user will not get a confirmation message that this is happening to them, but when the download is complete, the icon will again appear down here in the status area with a message telling you that the updates are ready to be installed. So then if you click the icon or the balloon message, it will provide you with the option to select which updates you'd like to install. Now the final option here, option 4, of 3, funnily enough, is the Auto Download and Schedule the Install option. With this option, Windows will download these updates in the background as it did here with option 3. However, in option 4, you can specify the schedule when we'd like to install these updates. Now if you don't choose a schedule, the default schedule will be applied, which is to install these updates every day, at 3 AM. Now if any of the updates does require a restart to complete the installation, Windows will restart the computer automatically. But if a user is logged onto the computer when Windows needs to restart, the user will be notified and given the option to delay the reboot. Now a final note before moving on. If the status of this policy is set to disabled, then any updates that are available on the Windows Update website must be downloaded and installed manually by going to windowsupdate.microsoft.com. This means that your SUS server will not be servicing your clients. If on the other hand the status is set to not configured, then the use of automatic updates must be configured through the control panel. Now I prefer not to go through the control panel. I'll just press here Start, right click on my computer and select Properties. Now up here on the Automatic Updates tab, this is what we're referring to here. Okay, I'll just cancel out of this here. We'll leave this at enabled, we'll leave it with the default, and we'll just click Next here to move on to the next policy. In this policy, specify Intranet Microsoft Update Service Location. What it's really asking here is, tell us where your SUS server is. So again, we'll have to enable this, and here we actually have to type in the name of our SUS server. Our server was server 2, so we'll leave that at that. I'll just cut and paste the second one here into the statistics server as well. Okay, so as I just said, this particular location is just saying which is our SUS server, where is it? Okay, we've just pointed our group policy to our SUS server. The second setting here with the intranet statistics, this setting is where the client is going to upload its updated statistics. Now generally this will be the same server, although in a child-parent server arrangement you might elect to have this server, this client rather, send the information to the parent instead of the server that's actually pulling the updates from. Now whatever you choose here, the statistics server must be running IIS. The specified statistics server will receive success or failure information about the download and installation of updates from the SUS client, and these statistics will be reflected in the IIS logs of the statistics server. Okay, so we'll just move on, we'll click on Next, and here we can reschedule automatic updates scheduled installations. Now this setting defines the amount of time we should wait to restart a scheduled installation that did not complete. Now if we think back to the first policy we configured, we had an option 4, which I'll just go back and have a look at here, which was to automatically download the updates and then schedule the install. We'll just move back. And what we're talking about here is the scheduling of the install. Now if our computer was turned off at the time, which was defaulting to 3 AM when our schedule should install the updates, if it was turned off and we missed those updates, we can use this option to initiate the installation of the updates after we restart our computer. So we'll click Enabled. You can see that the default here is 5 minutes. So basically 5 minutes after we restart our computer the next morning when we arrive at work, our computer will start the installation of any updates it missed. Now if our 3 AM policy update did happen, then this setting here is not going to have any effect. This is only referring to rescheduling automatic updates that did not occur. Okay, so we'll move on to the final policy, we'll click Next, and here we have the No Auto Restart for scheduled automatic updates installations. Now again, this one here also relates to option 4 we had in the first policy. If we do not want the policy to force Windows to restart the updated computer, we would set this to Enabled. Otherwise, setting this policy to Not Configured, the default, or Disabled, will make our computer reboot after the scheduled computer updates. Okay, so that is all of our policies complete. Now, final note about these policies is the last 3 policies we just looked at here. We'll just click OK and we'll just scroll across so we can actually see them. The last 3 policies here we're talking about, they will not have any effect on anything if this particular policy here, the first one to configure automatic updates, is not set to Enabled. So if nothing seems to be working, it's probably a good idea to come back in here and just ensure that the first policy is in fact enabled. So okay, we've done that. Our policies have now been completed. Now because this is a Windows 2003 server, we actually don't need to do anything else. The server's now domain controllers OU will automatically download updates from itself, which is server 02. Now another thing I'd like to touch on is the security of our SUS server. Now if you have a security conscious organization, as one should expect most to be, you have a couple of choices to further secure your SUS server. The first is to administer the server locally and not remotely. The second is to use HTTPS to connect to the server. So first you need to get a valid digital certificate for server authentication for your company. Now this certificate should be stored on the local machine store of the SUS server. So after you have the certificate installed, you'll need to do the following steps. First, what we'll do is we'll open up our IIS Manager. Now we need to right click on the default website, which is where our SUS server has been installed, and we'll select Properties. Now on the website tab here, which is the default tab, we'll need to enter the SSL port of 443, and then we'll need to move up here to the Directory Security tab and click on the Server Certificate button. Now this will start the Web Server Certificate wizard, so we'll simply just click Next. Now as we already have our certificate on our server, we'll need to click Assign an Existing Certificate, and we'll click Next. Now here is where our certificate would appear had we had one installed. So we'd simply select the certificate up here, we would click Next, we'd need to confirm that this is the correct certificate and click Next again, and then we'd need to click Finish and OK, and we'll close the dialog box and we're done. Now for further security, take a look at our videos on IIS security where we discuss further locking down of your IIS server. Now even if this isn't going to be a dedicated SUS server, you won't want to miss out on the performance and security benefits we talk about in those videos. Okay, so now I want to move on and talk about how to back up our SUS server. In the event that the server running SUS should encounter a boot failure or any other scenario where the server may require having the operating system or the SUS software reinstalled, it's a good idea to have a recovery plan in place. So the first thing we need to do is back up the website directory that the administration site was created in, the SUS directory that contains the content, and the IIS metabase. So the first thing we need to do is open our IIS Manager, and then we need to select our server, we'll right click, choose All Tasks, and Backup Restore Configuration. Now this of course brings up the Backup Configuration Restore dialog box. We'll need to create a backup, so we'll click on Create Backup. And we need to give the new backup a name, so we'll just call this SUS just to make it easy to identify. Now here you can choose to encrypt the backup using a password. We won't worry about that at the moment, so we'll just click OK. And we can see our backup has been confirmed here in the window, and we'll just click Close. Now that we've created the IIS Metabase backup, we need to run NT Backup to back up the data. So we'll click on Start, All Programs, Accessories, System Tools, and then we'll select Backup. Now we need to click on the Backup tab. Now because our server is using the default website settings, we'll need to back up the CINETpub www root directory and all of its contents below. If we just expand this, we can see here some of the SUS directories. Now we'll also need to back up the SUS content directories, so we'll select SUS down here. And finally, we need to back up our Metabase backup that we just performed a moment ago. So to do that, we'll expand Windows, we'll scroll down, we'll find System32, we'll expand that, we'll scroll down again until we find the INETserv directory, and here we can see the Metaback directory. So we'll click that one here. If we click in here, we can in fact see the SUS backup that we created. Okay, so we've got everything I need. We have the three things for our SUS backup. Now we need to provide a backup name down here in the bottom. We'll just give this a backup. We'll just call this name Backup SUS, just so we know what it's referring to, and we'll just simply click on Start Backup. Now we'll get a dialog box here where we can customize the backup and media descriptions and set the backup to occur on a schedule if we wish. We just want it to start, so we'll just click on Start Backup, and of course the backup will start. Now, as with any backup cycle, it is a good idea to create regular backups as new content is often synchronized to the SUS server. The IIS Metabase does contain information about all the updates provided through SUS, so a new backup of the Metabase should be created using the IIS console before running NT Backup to back up the data to media. Now this will take a while, so what I will do is just pause this video and we'll return when this backup has completed. Okay, so our backup has completed for our SUS server. We'll just close this down here. Now let's go through the process of restoring our SUS data in the event of a failure. So the first thing we need to do here is physically disconnect the server from the network. Now this just ensures that our server is kept free of viruses before we reinstall our SUS software. The next step is to install the same operating system the server was previously running. In our case, we'd need to reinstall Windows 2003. When installing the operating system, be sure to configure the server to have the same computer name it previously had. And we also need to install the same IIS components that the server also previously had installed. Now after the operating system is installed, ensure that you have the latest service pack and security fixes installed, so you might want to use the regular Windows update for this. Now finally, we'd install SUS in the same directory that it was previously installed to, and then we'll begin restoring our data. Okay, so now that our server is operational and SUS has been reinstalled, we need to start the process of restoring our SUS configuration and the content data. So we'd fire up NT Backup and we will select the Restore and Manage Media tab. Now we need to locate our backup over here on the left hand side. We'll expand this button here and we can see our backup SUS that we created earlier. So we'll expand this. Now a point to make here, if you are unable to expand this backup to view the contents, you might have to catalog your backup first. So to catalog a backup, we'd simply right click on the backup file and we'd select catalog. Now you should be able to view the contents of the backup file here if you weren't able to before. So what we can do here is we can expand this and we can verify yes, these are the directories that we backed up. So we'll place a check here in the C drive to select all the files and directories to restore. Now make sure down here that we are restoring our files to our original location, as we see in this drop down box. Now over here we just click Start Restore. We will get a dialog box asking us to confirm our decision, so we'll click OK, and the restoration will begin to take place. So our restore is finished. We get our standard dialog box here telling us that our restore has been completed. Now at this point we can click close, or we could click on the report button here to find out a little bit more about what the restore actually did. So okay, so our SUS configuration and content has been restored back to its rightful location. There is still one more thing we need to do, and it involves IIS. So what we'll do, I think I still have it open, I do, we'll go back here to our IIS manager. Now we need to restore the metabase. Now we actually have restored the files associated with the metabase in the restore of the files we just performed, but we need to tell IIS to begin to use this metabase. So once you've opened IIS Manager, you'll need to select your server, which we've got selected here. We'll right click, select all tasks, backup, restore configuration. Now here we can see our SUS backup that was created of the metabase. This time instead of creating a backup, we need to select restore. This will tell us that it's quite a lengthy process for this to happen, so we'll just click yes. Now we will pause the video at this point and we will return once this has been done. Okay, so our metabase has been restored. IIS now knows about it. So once this is actually complete, we'll just get our confirmation messages saying that it's happened successfully. Now you should log back into your SUS admin page and check the set options page to see if the old settings are in place, and also check the approve updates page to see if your previously approved updates are still approved. So congratulations, your SUS server has now been restored and is back to full functionality. Now the last thing I want to talk about is troubleshooting the SUS server and the client updates. The first thing to ensure is that clients can see and connect to the SUS server by name, so a quick ping of the server will put your mind at rest here. Okay, so let's start by having a look at the server side of things. Now when we're connected to our SUS server via the SUS admin webpage, if you have problems connecting and changing the settings or synchronizing the server here, generally the problem is related to the software update services synchronization service. Now most of these issues can be resolved by restarting this service. I'll just click on Start, Administrative Tools and Services to bring up our Services MMC. I'll just expand this so we can get in here a little bit and see the service itself. Okay, we can see this service here is set to automatic. It is started. Now this is the service here that I'm referring to. If we do have any of these problems we've talked about, you can simply right click on this service and set restart and select restart to recycle this service. Now go back, try reconnect to your SUS admin web page, and you should now be able to make changes. However, what happens if you can't connect to the web page at all? Now the problem here is likely an IIS problem. In this instance, you should scroll down here and you should restart the www publishing service. Now from a client perspective, if we're having problems, we first should check to see if the automatic update service is running. Now as our SUS server here is also a client, we see here the automatic update service. Now currently it is set to started, but recycling that might be one of the first things you might want to try. Actually that also brings me to another point. Don't ever forget that your SUS server itself can and should be a client of its own SUS service. So don't forget to include your SUS server to be updated, otherwise you may very well find this host which is the most vulnerable to attack on your network. Now imagine that, hey, the server that provides automatic security updates to your servers being the one which is unsecure. Strange, but very possible unless you include it in your plans, so please do. Now finally, we should take a look at the Windows Update log. Now this is a plain text file which is found in your C/Windows directory here. We can see windowsupdate.log. I've actually already opened it over here, so we'll go and have a take a look at it. Now this log will display all successes and failures relating to Windows updates. Now one thing I do want to point out here is this line right up here. We can see that we've actually got an error, OX801-90194. Now this actually is an IIS 404 or a file not found error. Now this error here is an expected error and you can probably expect to see it in your log, so don't get alarmed when you do see it. Now if the hexadecimal error code here, as we see, begins with this OX8019, we can take the final 3 digits, which is a 194. I'll just fire up our Windows calculator here. We'll just change this to a scientific mode. If we click the hex button here and type in 194 and then convert this to decimal, you can see that this is in fact a 404 error or file not found. This error actually gets logged when the automatic updates client tries to check the SUS server for driver updates that the SUS server doesn't synchronize. Now because the auto updated drivers folder does not exist on the server that's running SUS, the client will throw up this error. So it's okay, just ignore that one there. Now the other thing I'd actually like to point out here, if we just go back here, is that unlike the regular Windows Update, which downloads updates to a temporary folder, which here we see here, the Windows Update temp folder, SUS updated computers don't use this temporary path. They use the temporary path of program files / Windows Update. So be aware that if you are looking in this regular old path here for evidence of updates, you won't find them here. They are listed under the program files directory. Now a final note before we wrap up this discussion of SUS is your clients can still bypass your SUS server updates by going directly to windowsupdate.microsoft.com and updating their computers the manual way. So this means that they can also download unapproved updates, which is definitely what you do not want to happen. Now it's not a good idea to put a block on this site altogether, as your SUS server will need to access it. So consider using group policy to block this site for your users, or you can redirect this site to a custom page on your web server telling your users that updates are happening automatically in the background and that they should go off and do some real work instead of mucking around on the internet. So whatever solution you decide, just make sure your SUS server is unaffected by your decision. Okay, so that's Microsoft Update Services in a nutshell. It's a fantastic tool which you can not only save tremendous amounts of bandwidth by downloading updated content once only, but it also provides faster updates and more administrative control over the updates that you allow into your organization.